Adam, thank you for spending the time today. And we do see your screen. You're off and running.
Thank you for having me, and welcome everyone. Hopefully today, after the end of this presentation, you'll learn a little bit more about planting trees and shrubs and helping them get the best start. I like this photograph initially because it looks like there's a bunch of larches here. And if you've been hiking recently, you'll know that the larches are starting to turn colors. So if you're hiking in the mountain areas, you'll definitely see larches that look like this if they're growing in that area, which they are native, the western larches, to this area. I just thought that was a really pretty picture. So the objectives is to identify some important functions of trees, look at different aspects in selecting trees for your property, and then choosing the right species for the right space, and then how to start off successfully with your tree and shrub. And then we're going to look at steps for planting bald and burlapped trees, and then look at briefly identify when and how to stake trees and some steps for earlier tree care, and then how to mulch your new tree or shrub, and then identify brief aspects of pruning. And I know that we've all been to nurseries, otherwise we probably wouldn't be in this seminar right now, but I say trees and shrubs, lots of them come in different ways, right? We've been to the nursery, some of them are in plant containers, some of them are balled and burlapped. And so there's a general guidelines for planting both of these. So kind of using trees and shrubs synonymously. Trees is just what you have to look out for most of the time of planting in certain areas, as do shrubs as well. I have planted some shrubs that I've had to move. I'm like, uh-oh, that's getting too big for that space. So some highlights of trees and shrubs. Properly placed trees can reduce heating and cooling costs by 10 to 20% in your home. And they can also increase the home's value by 6 to 12% than those homes without trees. Obviously, there's a lot of home building going up. I live in Kalama, and so there's lots of different homes going up, and they've done a lot of logging in a lot of areas. And every time I drive by, I see individuals planting trees after the trees have been logged. And I'm just thinking how long it's going to take for those trees to grow up enough to actually reduce heating and cooling costs within those homes, especially those homes that are in direct sunlight, and also homes that are in direct wind as well. So that's something to consider. Trees and shrubs conserve air, water, and soil and provide habitat for wildlife. Large shade trees can act as an outdoor ceiling and adds more feeling to your yard. Shrubs can block an undesirable view and enclose an area for privacy and create rooms within your landscape. I know I have a bunch of landscape shrubs in a circle, and that creates a fire pit room within my landscape. And it's probably one of my favorite areas in my landscape, actually. And I also have some trees for screening as well. And we know that trees cleanse the air by absorbing carbon dioxide and giving off oxygen. So before you buy a tree or shrub, there's a few things that you should know. We need to look at where we intend to place the tree. Is the site suitable? Is the soil good? Is there plenty of water? Is the tree or shrub going to get enough light in this area? And is it hardy for my area? And will this site allow for adequate growth of the tree or shrub? And is this the right species for this site? With that being said, I had bought some coast redwoods, and they grow really, really fast. They're actually just right outside, kind of acting as a barrier between two pieces of property. And this fall, actually, I have to actually transplant one of them because they're just going to be too close to one another. And I want to do it now before it gets too late, because they've only been in the ground about 2 years. So that'll be a task when it's a nicer day than it is out today. So you want to go out and take a look at your yard, and think about how big this tree or shrub will be in about 10 to 20 years when it's fully mature or reaching maturity. Is this still the right spot for this tree? And if you buy a house that's already been landscaped, what we can do is make sure that this spot is an ideal spot for this tree. And then people who move into newer homes, who may have had landscaping already done and the house is 10 years old, and we have seen houses where landscapes have been unkempt and trees are overgrowing, and then you have to remove these trees and put new things in that will also take some time to grow. And then also, what purpose will this tree or shrub serve? Is this for a privacy screen? We know that if you're wanting to do a privacy screen, you may not want to go with a deciduous tree or shrub, right? Because in the wintertime, it's going to lose its leaves, and then you're going to lose that privacy as well. And then if you want a windbreak, you can consider evergreens, such as cedars, which make good choices for windbreaks. And if you can see in the photo down below, you can see that they have where the winds come through, and they've used a little bit of a screen here with some evergreens to protect the winds. And they've also allotted an area for some fruit trees here. And so they were able to, I suspect that these are more ornamental deciduous trees here where they can get more summer wind and then sunlight better in this area. So it nicely frames the house here. So you just have to kind of take a look at what your property looks like. And if you have a drone, I would suggest that fly that up and take a look at your property overall and see where you might benefit from trees and shrubs at. And so some considerations of the site is, does it provide enough space? And consider the crown of the plant as well as the root system. I know that we've probably all been through Longview if you live in this area, and those sidewalks aren't ideal for walking on all the time, right? Because they have roots that have disrupted the cement there. And you also have to consider that with your driveways, your house foundations, which all may impede root growth, and then the roots may grow through the sidewalks and also lift up driveways as well. And are the winds and sun conducive to growth? You have to consider, shallow roots and the potential for blown over trees, and ensuring that they're also planted properly. If they're planted improperly, they can have a tendency to blow over in time. And then you have to consider overhead obstacles as well. You have to look at utility wires. Trees at maturity can cause power outages and require routine pruning, which can affect the overall aesthetic of the tree that you planted. So a tree that you may think was beautiful at 5 years old may have to be cut and limbed out, and it may not be as pretty after they do that to avoid power outages. And then you also want to avoid planting within 25 feet of utility wires. And we'll go over in a little bit some trees that are more ideal for planting around utility wires. Then you also have to evaluate soil conditions and if you need to add amendments to the soil and what needs to be added. So this is a picture that I wanted to add. This is just a sidewalk, obviously with a tree planted here that has, the roots have caused the sidewalk to buckle up. And like I said, if you've ever walked on some of the sidewalks close to the lake in Longview, you'll definitely see this just because of the amount of trees that are there. And so after you developed a site plan, you want to go to a nursery and take your plan with you. And you also want to avoid buying the cheapest tree, because you may regret this. It may be an undesirable species. It may have a bad form to it. It may also have other problems and be discounted. You also want to look at shade trees, ornamental trees, conifers, and evergreens, in which we'll go over a little bit of each of those. So shade trees are mostly deciduous trees. These are the ones that we're seeing right now turning their vibrant fall colors that everyone likes. So they'll turn these fall colors and then they'll fall off, and then we're left with cleaning up the leaves, or you can leave them for compost on the floor of the ground. So these are best planted 25 feet away from houses, buildings, or other obstacles. And these sizes can range from 25 feet to over 100 feet tall at maturity. Some of these you want to avoid planting near utility lines, and you want to avoid planting them too close to other trees. And ornamental trees are typically chosen for specific things like spring flowers, fall color, attractive bark, crown form, and these range anywhere from 25 to 50 feet tall whenever they're mature. Smaller ornamentals work well under utility lines or in confined spaces. And sometimes these are referred to as exotics, right? Because we do see palm trees in this area, and this is not typically an area that you would normally see palm trees in, but they seem to grow fine up here. I know that I have an ornamental tree in my landscape that I put in last year. I was able to look at some more mature specimens and see how big it got before I I placed it in the ground, and it is a paper bark maple. And while it has pretty fall color, it also adds some winter interest from this coppery peeling bark that it has as well. So that was a good choice for the spot that I put it in. It's still a baby tree though, but it's growing. So these are some coniferous trees, what we're surrounded by in the evergreen state. These have needles or needle-like leaves. These usually stay green all year, and they're good for adding in windbreaks as well as privacy screens. And so some of these that you see on here, noble fir, is native to Washington State. This is one that you will also see in use for Christmas trees. So you can buy living Christmas trees in the wintertime and plant these out in your landscape. They're really beautiful trees. Japanese yews, which we also see. Western larches, which are on the initial title page. These actually lose their needles in the wintertime, and then they grow back green needles. Atlas cedars, we see those. We see pine trees, some more pine trees, usually on the eastern side of the state. And then we have our spruces up here, a hemlock, a deodar cedar, which grows huge, and they add nice, they'll add a nice buffer for privacy and taller aspects. And so native trees are also something to consider. I personally like native trees. I have 6 vine maples that I intentionally put in my landscape to add as a screen. They have beautiful fall color, and they're a native species. So that means that they're going to grow really, really well for our area. It doesn't require a whole lot of work, a little bit of watering through the first year, and then they just seemingly take off. So some other trees that grow naturally in Washington and Oregon are the big leaf maple, the Acer macrophyllum, the Oregon white oak, and we know that we have numerous species of spruces, firs, cedars, and other deciduous trees in the area. So these are some trees for tough sites. So these do well in bad soil, urban conditions, or places that get extreme temperature. So these are things that you may see planted in parking lots because of the radiant heat. Some trees may not be able to withstand that. And so we have the Japanese Alcova here, and we see it's got a crown spread of 50 feet, and then it's zone 5 through 8. So that would look like it would do good here. The Turkish filbert, and you can see this is more of a pyramidal tree down here at the bottom, and its spread is 25 feet. So we know that that's usually like half on each side. So that's usually how I go about planting. And so a flowering pear, 10 to 30 feet, zone 5 to 8. And you can see here the foliage of it. The raywood ash, which has a really nice ferny looking foliage, is good for our zone as well. The golden rain tree, spread of 15 feet. So I usually consider like 15 feet from the diameter of each side. And then the thornless cockspur hawthorn, which has pretty flowers actually, and it has a crown spread of 25 feet and is good for our zone as well. So these are trees for fall color. So if you go to a nursery right now, you'll be able to see many trees putting on their fall color. And if you go live in the area and you're in Longview, you can go around the lake and see lots of trees as well. Luckily, they're labeled so you can see what they look like at maturity, most of them. So here's a red oak. You can just see this vibrant color. I personally like more of the orangish to red, so I'd probably look at something like a sweet gum, but it gets really big. I don't know if I'd necessarily have space for that here where I live, but it has the color palette that I tend to go for. A red maple is a spread of 40 feet, so 20 feet from the center on each side. A flowering cherry, which has really pretty flowers on it, pink flowers, and then a ginkgo, and then a flowering pear as well. So these are the trees that are good for under utility wires. Luckily, all of our utilities are buried where I live, but the ones that are not buried down the mountain often cause power outages. So hopefully one day they'll get those buried. But here again, we see the golden rain tree because it just doesn't get that tall. It has a crown spread of 30 feet. The emu maple, the glory bower, the kusa dogwood, which we know has spring flowers, Japanese lilac, cherry, and then a vine maple here, which is a native plant. And then spring flowers. So if you're looking for things to make your yard pop early in the spring. These are things that you could look for in the nurseries, crab apples. And crab apples usually produce little apples that sometimes the birds and things will eat as well. So you're also providing some food for wildlife and obviously nectar sources for honeybees and other native bees. Flowering pear, cherry, the eastern redbud, and then we see the thornless cockspur, hawthorn again, and then the star magnolia, which is the smallest of a crown spread of 15 feet. So that's not very big. So if you have a tree for a small space, that's definitely one to consider. And then energy conservation. So these are things that will help shade your house and reduce your energy cost overall. So deodar cedars are huge trees. There's one planted down the street from me, and it's ginormous and it's absolutely beautiful. And so you could plant this kind of off to your house, which would provide both a windbreak and help shade your home and help reduce heating and cooling costs. And I feel like we all could have used a lot more trees this summer when we had our heat wave. I wish all of my trees had been fully grown at that time, providing shade for my house. And so here's a horse chestnut, American linden, red maple, katsura tree, and then a tulip tree. And you can see all of the height variations in the crown spread on these. And I think that these diagrams do a really good job of just giving you a visualization of the different sizes that these trees can get. And so here are trees for water conservation. So these are trees that you can plant, and after the first year or two after planting them, you don't necessarily have to worry about going out and making sure they're watered. So we see the hackberry, the yellowwood, the Turkish filbert, which I kind of like the stature of this tree, eastern redbud, the Amur maple, and then the Canada red chokeberry. But I'm the type of person who doesn't like to clean up a lot of messes from trees, so I try to avoid trees that drop like huge seed pods and have big leaves to clean up as well. So I try to avoid trees like that. I usually go for the more ornamentals on around my house proper, and then I'll plant more larger trees out a little further away. That way they can just fall to the ground and then decompose more naturally. And so planting your tree and shrub. So planting season, it's now. You can go to the nursery and get your tree and plant it. This is the perfect season to plant any tree or shrub, or to move them. I have some trees and shrubs. Like I said, I have some shrubs and trees that I have to move, and it needs to be done this fall. So I'll be doing that soon. And so whenever you want to plant shade or ornamental trees, you want to make sure that they're dormant. So you can get them and then you overwinter them, and then you can plant them in the spring even. Conifer trees you can plant this fall. That way they're nice and established before the winter hits. And you want to avoid planting in hot, dry weather. And whenever you're transporting, you can stress your tree. So you always want to ask the nursery if they can tie up the limbs. And you also want to protect the bark, the leaves and the buds. And the leaves will be, when they wrap it up, the top of it, they will be able to help protect the leaves some. But with a bark, you want to make sure that you can pad that in some way. If they're a smaller tree, you can always just get some pipe cover that you would insulate a pipe with and just kind of put that on the tree. You can even get a pool noodle and cut it in half and kind of put it on the tree trunk. But the reason for that is if you damage that bark and the cambium layer, then it can increase the risk of it getting a disease, which can hurt your tree. And then if you need to store your tree, you need to store on the north side of the building and keep the root ball moist even through the winter time. You also want to put bare root trees in loose soil or sawdust. I tend to always just plant bare root trees in a nursery container with potting soil and then put them to the side and water them. I don't typically use sawdust because it's not something that I have readily available, but I just will go ahead and plant them in a pot like they were at a nursery waiting to be sold, and just make sure that I take good care of them and block them from any super severe temperature extremes. All right, so since I can't go outside and plant a tree for you, I thought that I would use technology, since that's what we have to use today, to watch a short video from Mississippi State University Extension on how to plant a tree properly. So I'll stop talking and let this video play.
One of the biggest problems I see in many gardens and landscapes is planting trees incorrectly. It can lead to a lot of difficulties down the road. So here are some tips to help you enjoy that tree for many years to come. Early spring sees a great selection of container-grown trees in the garden centers. This is a great time to plant a tree as there's enough time for the tree roots to become acclimated before the hot and humid summer weather settles in. First off, be sure to dig the hole at least twice as wide as the container. While supporting the root ball, use your hand and wrap on the sides of the container and remove the tree. Never grab the tree by the trunk and try to force the container off. Gently loosen any roots that may be matted. I believe this is better than using a knife to slice any matted roots around the edges. Then place the root ball in the hole. I like to plant trees with the top of the root ball a little higher than the surrounding soil, so don't dig the hole too deep. Research has shown this helps with drainage and increases transplant survivability. Keeping the tree straight, backfill the hole and tamp down to remove any air pockets, and don't mound any soil up against the trunk. Add 2 inches of mulch around the area, making sure to pull any mulch back away from the trunk. And don't forget to thoroughly water the tree in, and water well on a weekly basis during the first year to help the tree get established. Planting shrubs instead of trees? Just follow the same tips. I'm horticulturist Gary Bachman, and I'll see you next time on Southern Gardening.
All right, so the next video is how to plant a balled and burlapped tree. This is what we often find in nurseries. You'll find these sometimes sitting in sawdust as well to protect them and to keep their root balls moist. Just know that you can get balled and burlapped trees are often around here. You see them wrapped with like baling twine and burlap. You can get some with like a metal net around the bottom of them. This video kind of talks about how we need to remove all that stuff. I planted balled and burlap trees and I just put everything in the ground, or I'll cut all the twine off and then I put it in the ground and then try to pull all of that out because the burlap will disintegrate over time, but the baling twine won't. Sometimes metal will, but it takes a really long time. So I just don't like putting that in the ground, but we'll go ahead and watch this video as well. So you can see on both of those videos, they really encourage you to keep the dirt and the mulch away from the trunk of the tree. And the reason that is it can cause it to rot and increases the risk of disease as well. They also recommended that you keep grass from the top because that can deprive the tree of nutrients because the grass would be soaking up all the water and may not necessarily be getting down to the tree. So that's why they recommend cutting that away as well before you plant the tree. And so now we're going to go into staking your tree. Most of the time, trees don't need to be staked whenever they're planted. You may consider plant or staking a tree within the first 6 months to a year if they're in a windy area. So young trees standing alone with their tops free to move develop stronger, more resilient trunks than staked trees. And then too much wind can bend young trees and disturb the root ball and stress the tree. So that might be something to consider staking in that instance. And if staking doesn't allow some movement of the trunk, the tree will not allocate any growth to the main stem, will be unstable when the staking is removed. And then that can also make this the tree overall unstable, potentially causing it to blow over in the future. So some early tree care, you can see the mulch around the base. Even in the videos, they put a little berm up just to kind of help trap the water to soak down to the root system. This is a tree with drip irrigation around it. So you can see that they have it coiled a couple of times just to make sure that the tree is getting adequately watered. And this was my point about not letting the grass grow up right to the tree trunk because it can rob the tree of nutrients and water. They do sell like pre-made mulch mats that you can put around a tree at the base of it. It kind of acts as mulch that you don't have to replace. They sell those at the big box stores. And so you do want to apply mulch to help retain moisture. Again, keep that away from the trunk of the tree. Water it regularly. You saw in the video like a 1-inch diameter, 10 gallons, and then 2-inch, 20 gallons. Remember that trees also require regular watering in the winter months as well. Luckily, on this side of the state, we get lots of rain. However, sometimes that can slack off, and I would recommend watering the trees in that instance. You also have to consider if water is actually getting into the soil itself. Like if you have to keep it over winter, you need to make sure you're watering it because usually the water won't get down into the pot that it's in. So you want to examine the soil moisture 4 to 8 inches deep, and if it feels dry or slightly damp, the tree needs to be watered. Obviously, a well-drained sandy soils need more frequent watering than those of clay or loamy soils just because they don't hold on to water. And the best way to water a new tree is to place a garden hose at the base and let it slowly trickle there for the next couple of hours or until the soil is thoroughly soaked. So here's some mulching. So like I said, this is important for retention of moisture, suppression of weeds, and it discourages damage from weed eaters and mowers. Obviously, if you get close to it and you hurt that bark, you're increasing the risk of that tree getting a disease, opening up to insect damage as well. So this will sort of help act as a barrier and a reminder whenever you're out working in your yard, like I don't need to get close to this tree because I don't want to damage it. And so wood and bark chips makes good mulching material, and you want to use 3 to 6 inch layers. And like I said, keep it away from the bark of the tree. So this is just a very brief pruning picture that I wanted to put up just because I think pruning is an important part of tree care. There is a separate pruning class that you can go and view that's been pre-recorded that Art Fuller did. So it's an important component of keeping a tree healthy, and you can prune conifers late in the summer and fall. And this reduces the amount of pitch that the tree produces. And then you should prune deciduous trees in late winter or early spring before the leaves begin to appear. And that also helps you figure out where you should prune. It helps you look at the tree and see what it would be like leafed out, but the leaves won't be there, so it's easier in general to prune. Then it allows for the new growth to cover the wounds and lets the trees internally seal the wounds. So you can see on hardwoods at the top, you can see the branch collar is here. You don't want to cut into that. You just want to cut right above it. And then you can see on conifers, the branch collar here, and you want to, don't cut through that. You want to cut just slightly above it. So there's some additional resources. We're going to get done a little bit earlier, so you'll get some of your day back. The Arbor Day Foundation, treesaregood.com. Obviously, Washington State University Extension has a multitude of resources on fruit trees, pruning, and diseases in general. We didn't really talk about diseases just because that's a whole complex course in and of itself. There are many things that can cause trees to be diseased. It can be something as simple as not having enough nutrients in the soil, but luckily we have a plant and insect clinic that you're more than welcome to contact, and they can help you figure out what is wrong with your tree or shrub. So I am finished. If anyone has any questions or anything.